really, I do think we have to start changing our mindsets a little of creativity, bold to consistent, making sure that we understand this pattern recognition piece, right?
Right. So human beings, I think, tend to forgive the inconsistency if there's a little shot of novelty of some dopamine or something like that that engages them. But AI is not paying attention to that.
Welcome to the Omniscient Buyer Show, where AI, trust, and buyer behavior collide. Hosted by Andy Helko and Tony Zayas, this show explores how modern buyers are using AI to research faster, verify claims instantly, and demand radical transparency from sales and marketing teams. If your buyers already know more than your sellers, you're in the right place.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's show. In the book, The Omniscient Buyer, Andy, you make the point that AI doesn't believe necessarily like single claims. It believes patterns. So consistency really is what builds confidence, and inconsistency tends to create doubt. Last time we talked about the buyer's AI co-pilot. And so I think it's kind of an obvious progression to talk about, like, how does AI decide what to trust? So if you can, let's dive in and walk us through that.
Yeah, I'm going to nerd out on you a little bit here, which I know everybody loves, but I deep down am a little bit of a nerd. So if we think about search optimization in the past, right, it was quality and relevancy. And so there were signals for quality and relevancy for you to show up. A great example of a signal there, we talked about inbound links, people linking to you because other humans said, this is worth paying attention to, right? And so you could be very creative and create a really cool article, a great headline. We'll call it link bait, or, all that stuff that was created so that humans would be like, awesome, let me share it. Let me link to it. Let me talk about it. Now, AI, on the other hand, is a technology that matches words together and says, okay, these words are often seen together. And so this word comes after this one. And there's a 5% probability that if this word is used before that one, this one's going to come next. And you can't even fathom in your head the connections between words that they've built by scanning millions and millions of content pieces, right? And so it's got a whole different idea of what connects together. And when you prompt, it's going in and saying, based on what it asked, here's the likelihood that I should put these words together based off of my algorithm. That is a totally different thing than search. Before, humans were saying, pay attention to this. Now a computer is saying, do these words have likeliness to go after one another? And so when you get asked about a brand, the idea is like, did your brand's name connect with the other words that were inputted on a statistically high point, right? And so it's much more now. Before, we could rely on creativity to get other humans to give us relevancy. Now we have to rely on consistency so that the computers see a pattern in what words are connected together. So if you break it down to the technology, it really is a whole new paradigm. And this is where I think SEO folks get mistaken when they say a lot of like, oh, the old tactics of SEO work. In some ways, yes, because the more content you get out there and the more connections, the more likely that these AI engines are going to see it. But from a technical consistency pattern recognition standpoint, it works way different than Google ever worked.
That's interesting. So basically the titles and the headlines, things like that grab attention of a human being, not always going to be the same, the top 10 ways to do this or that, right? That is the type of stuff that's really popular with people to grab their attention. So you're saying AI is looking at it differently, works differently. So something that is going to grab attention of a person doing a search, it's not necessarily going to happen the same way for the AI engines.
Yeah, I mean, AI doesn't care as much, or at least there's not as many signals for it
Right.
that this is important because you were creative. And so I do really talk about this mindset shift of before we wanted to be creative for a couple of different reasons. One, that could help us get traffic and links, and getting those got us higher on the search engines. And then the more clicks we got, the more search engines would actually think, oh, this is relevant too. And it would kind of spiral, right? And that creativity benefited us. Now, consistency benefits us. And that same creative headline doesn't matter as much because the user might never reach the page because they're doing the work in the AI engine. And instead, the AI engine is taking what you have and it's, regurgitating it, right? And so even that idea of like, oh, when the human gets there, we've got to have this cool, bold, punchy headline that captures attention.
Right.
That may not be as relevant as it used to be because a lot of the journey is happening in the AI chat and not on your website. And so really, I do think we have to start changing our mindsets a little of creativity bold to consistent, making sure that we understand this pattern recognition piece, right?
Right. So human beings, I think, tend to forgive the inconsistency if there's a little shot of novelty of some dopamine or something like that engages them. But AI is not paying attention to that. That's super interesting. So how do we balance, how as content creators and as marketers, how do we balance that in this new world of kind of duality?
Well, I think it is working for both. In the past, I think, you were really focused on how do we capture attention? How do we differentiate? A lot of times creativity was, how do we say this different so the humans don't get bored? And I think now we have to find a middle ground, right? I do think being unique, having a specific voice is important because AI also does look for like, when it sees a ton of patterns, but then there is something that swerves off a little bit, as long as it connects, it may pull it up. So there is a balance, right? It's not like make every headline on every article the exact same.
Right.
What I really like right now as a tactic is coining terms, is trying in your business to, take a term that is maybe popular, changing it up a little bit, giving its own meat, and then consistently using that.
Right.
We've been doing that with this buyer centric, where we talk a lot about buyer centric. The old pattern was customer centric. That's familiar. It's everywhere on the web. But for us, buyer centric, buyer alignment score, these terms that we've coined, they are now starting to get into the pattern recognition because we're matching customer centricity and all these terms around, how do you understand your customer persona? And when we talk about it, we're using our term buyer centric consistently every single time. And what that does is it does start establishing a pattern for the AI engines that those things are connected. But the interesting thing is we end up being the one and only source for that part of the pattern, right?
Right. So if we go back to just for a second, just to like step outside of our shoes and go back to the buyer that we talked about last week, it's like doing the research and you talk about the buyer alignment score. If they go to AI and ask that, saying that that's a phrase that we've coined and we've created content and we're talking about it and using it, it's a likelihood that, we might be referencing that, talking about it, which adds that credibility because we're the ones putting the ideas out there. So that's definitely a great way. What about a company that's, been around for a while and has done a lot more content just for like SEO sake, not necessarily branded or coined terms? What's the process for figuring out the split of, we got to maintain our SEO. We also want to get found in AI.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We could go down the rabbit hole. I think we've
Right.
already talked about it, how AI, whether it's through a search engine or generally, is going to take over because of, reduction in friction, and it's just easier for people to use. But one of the things that I think goes along with you're asking is, I was just talking about this, but, going back to old content and auditing, one of the things that I mentioned to an audience the other day and people kind of don't think about, but then shake their head, is if you've been in business for a while, you've got probably hundreds of PDFs and profiles on different websites and all of these different things that are out there and established. We've been in business 20 years. There's more things in random corners of the internet than I can even imagine. But what you have to remember is the AI engines have slurped that up, and it is now part of the pattern recognition.
Right.
And so there is, if you've been in business for a while, there is a tactic of going back and auditing and looking at these things and saying, are they saying what we want them to, so that the AI engines recognize the pattern that we want? And so, we may have been able to ignore some of that stuff in the past because it got buried on page 100 of Google search results and no one ever saw it. But now AI works a little bit differently. It finds everything and, calculates how the words connect together. And so it's important, as they continue to keep scraping and finding information, that when they do, even that old stuff matches the new pattern that we want.
Right. Yeah. And there's, like you said, rabbit hole. We could go down this pretty deep, and we'll probably wrap up here shortly for today. But I will say something that we've talked internally to our team about is really, I think we've always been a fan of like planting a flag in the ground and taking a stance on something. So our content over the years has tended to lean in that direction. But I think you probably would agree with me, that is becoming even more important, because for a long time, content marketing was just kind of content for content's sake. We got to show up. We got to, we have to have keywords in there and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that served a purpose at a point in time. But now the content is being judged a little more critically, because the AI engines can go in there and do that analysis. So briefly, is that something that
weird, razor's edge of pattern consistency? Again, I go back to the nerdy technology side of it, is that these AI engines look at patterns, but if someone asks something and the pattern is, this is said the same way in 1,000 places, it is going to bring back an answer that has it's going to use all of that, right? It's going to mash it together in a way that there's no one thing that has authority. And so, but on the other side, it's like, if you are talking about that, but you have a specific viewpoint on it, but it still fits within that pattern recognition, now the AI engine can say, okay, this still fits within it, but here is this piece that, is different than the others, and in the right circumstances, I'm going to raise it. And so it is this, it's hard to think about in some ways, but, we want pattern recognition, but we also want something that the AI engines can put a hook into to answer differently. And so that's why I really think this balance, and I'll use the customer centric again as the example of, the pattern recognition we're trying to get is traditional things like customer centric, customer obsessed, traditional terms that are everywhere in the zeitgeist of customer, right? But we're connecting it to our buyer centric, which is kind of a unique term that other people typically don't use.
Right.
And so it's a weird thing where we're trying to balance both, that all of that content has to talk about the common patterns so it can create the connections, but it has almost like an offshoot that's really special and unique to us. So it gives the AI engine a potential hook to throw out there.
Makes a lot of sense. It's a brand new way to look at things and think about things in a lot of ways, I believe. And for anybody who has not checked out Andy's book, The Omniscient Buyer, Super interesting. And we've said this before, I don't hear a lot of people talking about kind of that, looking at the buyer and understanding how they're changing and evolving. Everyone's talking about their organization, internally, their business, but everybody's tapping into it. So we have to get ahead of this. So we will be back again next time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Omniscient Buyer Show. If this episode challenged how you think about buyers, sales, or AI, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. For deeper insights on AI-powered buyer behavior, answer engine optimization, and modern go-to-market strategy, visit insivia.com.